Hello, I'm Moni Vargas, the Creative and Program Director at Breakthrough, a nonprofit culture change organization that uses media, arts, and tech to promote human rights. Welcome to Breakthrough Spotlight, our weekly video and podcast series featuring conversations with community leaders, activists, artists, and partner organizations working to build a world that is more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for all. Thanks for joining us. Hello, I'm Moni Vargas, Creative and Program Director at Breakthrough. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Breakthrough Spotlight. Quick reminder to our audience, please pose your questions via the comment sections and we'll address them toward the end of our talk. So today I am joined by Loira Limbal, a fellow Afro-Latina filmmaker and DJ, and she's interested in the creation of art that affirms women of color and builds solidarity across communities. She's also the Vice President and Documentary Lab Director at Firelight Media and the Director-Producer of Through the Night. It's a feature documentary about a 24-hour daycare in New Rochelle, New York. And she's joining us from the Bronx, New York, where she lives with her two children, beautiful, beautiful kids. Hola, Loira. How are you?
Hola, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Moni.
It's a very precarious time for all of us. So I just wanted to check in and just see how you're doing today, and then we'll get into Through the Night. It was a timely film a year ago, but now it just seems that it's completely compounded. Loida and I, we go way back, and we were just reminiscing of our days, pre-COVID. But I just want to check in and see how you're doing. I know that this time is difficult from a day-to-day just perspective, but just wanted to check in.
Yeah, today I'm okay. I'm not great, but I'm here. I think I was sharing with you just a few seconds ago before we went live. This has been a real whirlwind certainly everyone in New York, but even more so, I'm from the Bronx, and so many of my family members and neighbors and childhood friends have had, family members who've been sick in hospitals, people who have passed away. So it's really challenging, and I know we're all experiencing this pandemic in very different ways, depending on like who we are and where we live and income and race and all those things. But here in the Bronx, it's been rough. It's like no one has gone untouched, and yet we still have to kind of keep living and keep moving, and holding both of those things at the same time is a little bit difficult.
Yeah. I can only imagine. And I used to live in New York, and I have been just checking in with friends regularly because it's been so pervasive, and like you said, it is affecting our communities of color, communities that are underserved, and especially within healthcare. It's been a completely different experience for our communities than for others. So it is something to keep in mind. And I was saying earlier, this documentary Through the Night is such an important documentary, and it was important, a year ago. But now, with essential workers expected to work ridiculous hours of the day and night, I can see just how important childcare is for not only those workers, but for everyone. I mean, as we know, we're both moms, and it's something that we're always confronted with. So tell me about the film. Tell me how you started, and how this, what sparked this idea to do the film, and And tell us a little bit about the process. I know you've been working on this for 4 years now. So give us a little look into what that was like for you.
Sure. So Through the Night is a verite documentary. It's a feature-length documentary that tells the story of two working mothers and the woman who cares for their children at a 24-hour daycare center in New Rochelle, New York, which is right outside of the Bronx. And I it's sort of the goal was to create a portrait of this community, which I see as an ecosystem of support and care that is common in our communities, but we rarely see that be represented anywhere in the mainstream. And so that's, initially what I set out to do. And I actually heard about the daycare through an article that they were featured in that was posted in a mom's group that I'm a part of many years ago. And when I read the article, it automatically made me think about my own childhood. It made me think about my mother, who was a home health aide and a single mother and worked the night shift. She used to work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And as the oldest child, I was sort of her co-parent, her right hand. And I had a first kind of person view into how hard it was, the juggling act and the kinds of choices that we require parents of all stripes, but certainly women of color, working class, poor folks, to make. We give them these impossible set of options, and then they have to make those decisions and choose from these impossible set of choices. And then we judge them and we criticize them and we stigmatize them and we criminalize them for it. So when I read the article, it kind of brought all of that personal experience up, and I was like, this would be a great film, and so that's sort of how the story came about.
And I just saw the trailer. I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, you posted it, and it's so beautiful, and it's very moving. But then it's also it just brings to light what life is like for working moms, especially parents who are, like you said, working night shifts or working overnight. And what do you do with your children?
Come on, Mama, time to get up. Morning, baby. Come on. All right. Noah. Time to get up, Noah. I've been doing this for 22 years. I have all different types of families in my daycare. I have some that comes in at 6 o'clock in the morning that works to 8:30 at night. I have some that comes from 3:30 to 12:30 at night. I have some that comes in overnight. I see a lot of parents come in and break down. They don't want to do this, but they need to go out and work and pay their bills and take care of their family.
All right, I'll see you later. All right, baby, have a good day. Be careful.
This is the way the world is set up at this point.
I work on the night shift in a pediatric emergency room from 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. I never really thought of overnight childcare till I had to use it.
What? I've been working 7 days for almost 2 months. If I'm not working one job, I'm working in another job. So I'm always working and working. Hi, Mommy. Nuna's like my other mom. She helped me a lot. I can't believe you still have kids.
You know I have a house full of kids. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Love you guys very much.
Bye-bye.
I see you Monday. I have a Diana, but I don't think you're her bus. Chase, my grandson, yes.
Your grandson?
My grandson, I didn't know he was going to be on the bus today. Yes, yes, that's mine.
It's not just a job. This is really our life. My whole family has to be involved. My children, ever since they was the age of 2 years old, they had to share me with other children. I remember my children saying, "Mommy, why do they have to come first?"
Mommy!
As parents, you make sacrifices. It's not their fault that I work the way that I work, so I just do what I can. It's not easy, but eventually I'll sleep.
Do we love each other?
Yeah.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Do we love each other?
It's okay. I'm a daycare provider, so I'm constantly picking up babies.
Then you have to be careful. If you continue to have nominees, you need surgery.
This work is hard. I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing because I feel like if I lay down, I'm so tired I might not get back up.
Thank you, Loira. Such a beautiful portrait. You called it a love letter to caregivers and essential workers and mothers, single mothers. But something that really struck me is that this film is a testament to the lack of a safety net, a social safety net in this country. It really shows where capitalism has failed and failed us. But then, you see at the underlying theme here is love and care and making it work, right? So much of life these days is just making it work and getting through it. Tell us about your the way that you were able to gain access to this community and be able to tell such an intimate portrait of these lives.
Sure. So in terms of access, as I mentioned before, I heard about this daycare through an article that I read, and it turned out that I knew the photographer who had done, the photos for the piece. So I reached out to her, and I said, "Listen, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I think this would make a great film. Would you make an introduction?" And she actually said no. She didn't think that they would be open to a documentary. She said that they had some concerns while they had been working on the article and were a little bit sort of hesitant and weary. And so she didn't really feel comfortable making that introduction. And so I said, okay, well, I asked, I tried, and I said, okay, well, the answer is no, she's not going to make an introduction. And so I kind of let the idea go to the back burner a bit in my mind. But as time went on, I kept coming back to it and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And also I'm a mother, I'm a single mother to 2 children, and I work a full-time job. So part of it too, with the letting it go to the back burner, was me having some real doubts about the possibility of me actually making a film while working a full-time job and taking care of my kids. And I wasn't convinced that I really could. So I was like, yeah, you keep thinking about this thing, but it's probably best you let it go because there's no way, like where are you going to find the time? And that's too much. You shouldn't do that much, And so anyway, long story short, I sat on it for about 2 years. I didn't do anything. I had this kind of internal dialogue in my head about why I shouldn't and why I couldn't do it. And still, it wouldn't leave me alone. And so I actually went out and talked to a couple of other daycare providers who worked non-standard hours as well. And I still sort of kept coming back to this particular community. And one of the many things resonated for me about this community and this particular daycare. But one of the key things for me is that it's a mixed income community. And, you know, you have folks that are low wage workers, you know, that work retail or, you know, work a number of different, work in food service or a number of different, you know, or in health services like home health aides and others who are on the lower end of the wage spectrum. But then you also have nurses, you have postal workers, you have a range of folks. You know, you have maybe some folks that work at nonprofits. Uh, and for me, it was really important to be able to tell that type of story, so that in some ways it could inoculate against the people who might want to dismiss this as an issue that only affects poor Black people or poor Latinx people or poor immigrants. And I don't say that in judgment, in any way, shape, or form. You know, I think we are all deserving, regardless of what degree or what, you know, level of income we make. But I was interested in telling a story that reflected a range of socioeconomic backgrounds, to sort of say, like, this don't work for anybody. You know, the way that we are doing things, you know, to your point around capitalism, and our structures and the way that we do things in the US, which likes to call itself a family values country, right? The conservative loves to talk about family, the conservative right loves to talk about family values. And yet, like, you know, we make people basically kill themselves in order to provide the basics for their families. So I wanted to tell that story, and also because it's reflective of, you know, I did grow up in the South Bronx, which I think has a lot of kind of, for people might conjure a lot of images and stereotypes, but there is a complexity and a diversity in our communities and in our neighborhoods that is not the reality of the representations of our community, right? Like, we have folks that are working all kinds of things and no one is better than the next or whatever. Like, we all live in that same neighborhood, we're part of that community. You know, there's just a lot more complexity and nuance to who we are as Black folks, as Latinx folks in this country. And I wanted to, you know, be able to delve into that in this conversation. And so, you know, so anyway, I sat on it, and then I finally 2 years later cold called Nunu, who is one of the lead protagonists in the film, and just said, like, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it, would you take a meeting with me? And she said, let me talk to my husband, Patrick, who's the co-founder of the daycare and is also essential to running the community and the space. And I'll get back to you. And she called me 4 days later. She said, okay, can you come up here so we can meet? And I did, and we talked for about 2 hours. You know, I was like, look, if we're gonna do this together, I'm more than happy to respect whatever parameters or limits you all have. I'm a parent. I'm very sensitive to the fact that these are people's children, that there's an extra degree of care that is required here. And she looked at me at the end of the conversation and she was like, look, I'm looking in your eyes. I know who you are. I can tell who you are. I've been around the block a couple times. I want to do this with you. So you tell me what you need, baby, and we'll make it happen. And so, you know, to the question of how did I get access and, you know, how is it so intimate, is because she understood that this is my story. You know, this is my mother's story. I wasn't coming in with some sort of like outside gaze, trying to like understand or even trying to translate for some other audience. Like, I really did make this film thinking about, and that's why I call it a love letter, thinking about the fact that my mother deserves a film that reflects her experience. We all people deserve, you know, a myriad of representations of themselves and images and films that represent their lived experience. We all deserve that, but we know that for us, we don't really have that, you know, and my mother hasn't seen a film that she felt like, oh, that's me, or that's a part of me, you know. And the same, I can say that for myself as a single mother too, you know, like the parts of my experience that, you know, where I feel like there's a lot of kind of like stigma and judgment, and people are, have a lot of opinions, and want to tell you about yourself or what you're doing wrong, and how you're repeating some sort of cycle and some trope about Black and Latina, single mothers and all of this stuff. There's a lot, in terms of representation that's stacked against us. There's not a whole lot of representation that is like us trying to have a conversation with each other. And yes, it does reveal these larger macro, sort of issues. And that was part of the goal too, but that for me actually was a secondary goal. The primary goal was to create something where women in my community, my sisters, my mother, my family members, my neighbors, my friends, the people that I have been in community with could see themselves reflected, and they could be like, yes, that's actually right. That is what it feels like to be me and to walk through the world in my body,
Yes, it's so important. And, and along those lines, the fact that your production is also just an all women of color production behind the scenes, I think also speaks volumes to really creating that sense of safety and openness, on both sides of the camera. Tell us a bit about that, and how you went about, leading this.
Yeah, so it was a sort of a combination of factors. Because I knew that this film was going to be hard for me to make, I thought to myself, like, well, what are the kinds of constraints that I have, and what are the things that I could turn from constraints that I could transform into opportunities, right? And so, like, time was definitely one of those things. But then the other thing was, like, I thought to myself, like, in an ideal world, if I could make this film under ideal conditions, like, what would be those things? What did I need to have in place for that to be the case? And for me, quickly, it was like, well, I want an all women of color team. Like, I want everybody that works on this film and that steps into this daycare to, on an instinctual lived experience level, understand where they are and understand, like, what's happening, right? Like, I wanted there to be that level of kind of connection. And, it's interesting because as we started filming, what ended up, and as we were kind of crewing up and finding people, what ended up happening was that everybody that worked on the film did have some level of, like, personal connection to this particular story. Whether it was someone who was a mother, and was, like, having their own childcare struggles, or someone who had to work alongside their mother when their mother did not have childcare and they had to go out, their mother was a street vendor at one point and they had to, like, go out and vent, with their mom because they couldn't stay home alone. And so, or, one of the folks that ended up doing camera work with us, one of the cinematographers, her mother ran a home-based daycare. And so working in the daycare after school was like her high school job, so everybody did end up, and I think also everyone, because we were all women of color, there was this really strong shared desire to disrupt the dominant gazes, to disrupt the dominant gaze that dictates the majority of our stories. So that was something that was shared by everyone, and everyone is doing that in their work in different ways. But I think that was really, really important. And it even paid off, I think, because, with the children, someone else asked me at one point, the kids, like, they seem so comfortable. How did you get them to, like, not be focusing on the camera or whatever? And it really wasn't, like, hard. Yes, every time we went in to shoot, they would notice us and we would talk and we would, answer their questions and show them different things about the camera and explain parts of the process. But pretty quickly into every visit, they would go back to their normal sort of deal. And I think it's because in some ways, like, we look like the women that care for them. You know, we weren't like a bunch of kind of like blonde, blue-eyed dudes all of a sudden walking into the space, you know? We had the same accents as everybody that takes care of them. You know, it's like everybody was sort of familiar, and down to the kids, everybody was familiar and comfortable, you know, with each other, which I think then makes it so that the intimacy that you see on screen is possible, you know? So that's, you know, I would say part of it. But then I also really wanted to think about like experiences that I wanted to have professionally and creatively. I wanted to be in collaboration with women of color whose work I deeply admire and respect, and to be challenged and to grow, you know, with folks like that. So that was also part of it. There was a kind of personal creative reason for wanting to, and also a political reason, right? Because so many of our stories are not told by us. And I do really believe that it's important for us to tell our stories, you know, because we look at the ways that we look at the world are deeply shaped by who we are and what our experiences are in the world, right? So you can't divorce, you know, how you know, it's like having glasses, right? Like depending what glasses you're wearing, you're going to see things differently, you know? And so that was part of it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that context to it, because I've been to you know, at some of the documentary conferences that we've attended together. One of 1 year decolonizing docs was, you know, a big theme, and I do feel that, you know, I'm seeing a little bit of a shift, but it has to be intentional. So I'm you know, I'm right there with you. And when we're doing a project with Breakthrough, and it's the same, you know, we on the road, we want to have the crew reflect the folks and the young people that we are interviewing, because it just makes things a bit more comfortable, and creates that safe space, that feeling of, you know, I'm not being judged. I'm part of this community, and I see myself reflected on the other side of the camera. So I completely agree with having that vision for your projects. That said, you know, how, you know, there's so many different aspects of that I want to get to. So just want to be mindful. The two moms that you follow, that you know, the two protagonist mothers, how did that come about? You know, there's one that's a healthcare worker, and another that unfortunately needs to work, I think, 3 jobs to make ends meet. So can you tell me how you were able to not only forge those relationships, but allow them to share, or you know, had them share their story with you, because it's very personal, and you know, sometimes those personal stories can be difficult to get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, when Nuno agreed to be part of the documentary, that for me was, you know, there was the initial conversation, but it was a conversation that we revisited a number of times, because my approach to consent with protagonists is not, it goes beyond like getting people to sign a release form, particularly for something like this where it is a long-term project and you are asking people to share, you know, the most intimate parts of their lives. And so when Nuno, you know, agreed, and as we kind of kept having the conversation about what it would entail, I kept raising to her the question of why did she want to do this, you know, with me. And so that I could know that she actually really wanted to do it, and so that she could also have clarity on like what the goals were. And in that process, the relationship that has ultimately emerged is that she and I really have collaborated, you know. And so the mothers, you know, that end up being sort of featured in the documentary, Nunu recommended that. You know, Nunu was like, I think it'd be great for you to have, you know, Shanona, because Shanona works in the hospital and da 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 da, and these nurses, and oh my God, and this is important to show. And then, you know, Marisol, these employers won't give her full-time pay because they don't want to pay for health insurance, which were the things that Nunu felt that were important to highlight, you know, and so she basically was the casting agent. And then in terms of the relationship, I just spent time with folks, you know. I spent time with both of them before we did any filming with them or their children. Also talked to them about like why I was doing this and asking them why they wanted to participate, you know, because it's a lot to ask of people to embark on this journey with you. And until you've worked on a documentary or been in one, there's no way for you to fully understand what it entails, you know. So it's to me, it's like a kind of a continuous process where, you know, at least in my approach too, it was like I had to open up about who I was and what was going on in my life and why I even cared about this, you know.
Yeah, and looking now at the work that you're doing to support caregivers, I know that you launched an essential care fundraiser, and 100% of the proceeds will be given directly to daycare centers in the New York City area. So tell us a bit about what's happening to daycare centers in New York City specifically, but I think it's something that's happening across the country, especially post-COVID. And you know what really made you say, you know, this is something that we need to. This is the kind of impact that we need to have right now.
Yeah. So in terms of daycares and what's going on is something like over 60% of daycare centers have already closed because of COVID-19, 60. And we don't know who will be able to come back, right, from that. And so then also think about the effect of that on all the families and the parents that need that, because again, we don't all have the luxury of sheltering in place or working from home. We know this, right? Because we are getting people, you know, that we're getting food delivered, or we're going to hospitals for care, or we're going to supermarkets, we're going to pharmacies. Like all those places are staffed, and they're staffed by people that many of whom are parents. And the New York Times did a piece around like how something like 1 in 3 jobs that are considered essential are held by a woman of color. So this, like, think about, these were folks who already were operating on like the thinnest of margins, and now we're asking them to do that in a pandemic where the stakes and the risks are that much higher and the conditions are that much harsher. And then the little bit of a safety net that they have, which are daycare centers, many are gone, right? So, you know, think about like the compounded effect of all of that. So where are people's children staying? Who's caring for them? Are children being left home alone? You know, are you asking a 8-year-old to watch a 6-year-old? Maybe. And is our societal response to that going to be to have people calling ACS, or, you know, child services? In New York it's ACS, but, you know, it's different across the country. And then gonna accuse that mother of neglect? Yeah, that is kind of the pattern. That's what we do to Black and Latina women. That's what we do to poor folks. We criminalize everything that they do, again, after we've given them no options or no viable options, right? So that's, you know, kind of like the broader picture. And then in terms of the daycare centers that are still open, which there are, you know, some that are still open. The daycare center in our film is still open, and they are caring for the children of essential workers. But they are struggling because the parents, you know, most daycare centers will have a kind of mixed income model where you have some parents who are able to pay out of pocket. Those parents are sheltering in place, and they're working from home. So they're not sending their children to daycare. So that income is gone. And then they have parents who might receive some sort of voucher or assistance or subsidy to pay for daycare costs. Many of those people are the essential workers. And so their economic model is falling apart, and they're needing to still take care of their employees and all of those things. And they're not getting access to the small business loans and the paycheck protection stuff. And then they're also having parents that might be coming from immediately outside of their jurisdiction whose own daycare center is closed, and they're coming to them saying, I need care. You know, I know that you guys have been doing this work. You're great. You have a great reputation. Can you take care of my kid? Well, if you live in the Bronx, you can't take your child to a daycare center in New Rochelle and have your subsidy still apply. Mm. Right. So there's all these like gaps that people are falling within in this, again, in this moment of pandemic. And so the reason we decided to launch a fundraiser was to just raise some rapid response resources that we could put in the hands of a committee of daycare providers and parents who are like doing like acrobatics basically to fill those gaps right now. You know, and so it's just like, here, y'all know what the needs are. Y'all are already addressing them despite, you know, all the regulations and despite the kind of, you know, the norm. And so you are the best position to be stewarding resources and monies and, you know, do with them whatever is necessary. So it's a bit of a rapid response. You know, it's not meant to be, we know we're not going to solve everything, you know, with $50,000, but we're hoping that it buys our folks a little bit of time, you know, because as folks start to drop off, you know, this week, next week, the following week, that lessens the likelihood that they'll be able to survive this thing and come back, you know. And again, there are like so many folks in our communities that have so many needs. So we were like, you know, we were supposed to premiere at Tribeca Film Festival. Hi, Luna. I hear you, Luna.
She can hear you.
Your co-worker. We were supposed to premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival in April, and the festival, they didn't have online screenings, but they did provide access to like press and industry. And so we were able to get some reviews, and those reviews essentially started a conversation and some buzz. So we were like, oh, we have a little bit of a platform. It's not huge, but we have a little bit of platform where people are kind of listening to us and checking for us. Well, let's use this platform to raise some concrete resources for these folks. And, you know, and as this situation continues to evolve, our responses will as well. But the other thing I want to say about that too is that for me, this whole time, it has been really important to think about ways that films, documentaries concretely benefit the people that they're about, because there is, you know, this sort of idea around objectivity and best practices that really are inherited from journalism, where you're not supposed to pay people, you're not supposed to compensate the people in your film, because then, you know, the assumption is that you're paying them for their, you know, their testimony or for their contribution, and which then makes it be questionable and things like that, you know. And while we certainly didn't do any of that while we were in production, now that the film is done, you know, I'm thinking about, well, like, I'm benefiting from this film concretely. I did get paid. I get to live out my dream as a filmmaker. You know, I'm getting reviews. That's good for my name, right? It's good for my career. So I have tangible, both, you know, financial, what is it, like a financial return from the film. It's not great because there's not good money in documentaries, but something's coming in, right? And then also, like, there's a bit of like of a platform and some prestige and some new opportunities for me as an artist, as a filmmaker. So, you know, these things together, that's a lot of value that I'm getting from this. So why is it wrong to think that like the protagonists in the film should not get some concrete value beyond like, oh, it's a chance for them to tell their story? or it's a chance for them to heal through telling their story. Yes, those things are important and they're true. I'm like, can we mess with that notion a little bit? Can we problematize that? Because I'm getting concrete things in addition to the emotional and psychological benefits that I'm getting from this, right? So I feel like it's fair for them to get the range as well,
I could not agree more. I couldn't
So
agree more.
that's part of the conversation too, around like we're raising money, but it's a broader conversation that I do want to sort of be having,
Yeah, no, it's and I couldn't agree more. Even with the work that we're doing, we're providing honorariums. We're trying to get these young people plugged into real job training and skills, and how can they benefit. That's all I'm really focused about, is like, how
Yeah.
are they going to benefit from participating, because it
Yeah.
is time, it is effort, it is dedication, and it's an opportunity loss. What are you giving up at that time to to sit with us and interview and follow up? So I'm so happy that you're leading this this fundraiser, and we posted up the link. We'll post it up at the end as well. Yes, and I think it's like you said, it's a bigger conversation that needs to be had, not only around documentaries but also around caregiving. And how who cares for the caregiver. And I think that's the tagline of your film, and we thought it would be a great title for this conversation. And I think for us, I'm curious if there's as a mother, as someone who is not only working full time, but then also leading some leading filmmaking fellowships, and then you also have a whole creative life as a DJ, and what how are you taking care of you, and what have you what's like the biggest takeaway so far from this process that you've embarked on? And it's been a 4-year process, which a lot of people don't realize just how long these it takes to tell these stories in a beautiful way and in a very nuanced way. Yeah, what are those takeaways that you've had?
So many. It's like hard to even figure out where to begin. I think perhaps I would start with this question of who cares for the caregiver is something that I've been sitting with a lot recently. I mean, as I made the film, it's part of the question I was seeking to answer through the film. But then also in this COVID-19 moment, it just made me think a lot about how we ask caregivers to sacrifice themselves, and then we pat them on the back for that, and we call them heroes for that, and that's the normal order of things in our society. That and it's connected to motherhood and mothering, right? Like, this idea that a good mother is a martyr. You're supposed to sacrifice all of yourself, for this other being, and that there really are almost like no other models of care that do not require self-sacrifice. And I think that is the case because this is work that is seen as women's work. And so it's not valued, but even more so, in a racist capitalist context, this is work that is done by women of color, and there's a very long tradition in this country of, Black, Indigenous, Latinx women sacrificing themselves, for the care or the good of their first masters and now employers, and so this is not new. This is actually, woven into the founding narrative of this country. and that is why the work remains invisible and undervalued, because it is work that is done by people who are invisible and undervalued, or have no value, right? And so that's why caregiving is not valued. It's because of who does it, and beyond the work, it's because our lives don't have the value that they deserve. And this moment demonstrates that. We talk about, how everybody, we're all in this together. We're not all in this together. We might all be, there was a meme I saw online. I don't know the origin of it. And it was actually in Spanish. I translated it in my head, but it's like, we're all in the same sea, or the same ocean. Some of us are in yachts. Some of us are in rowboats. Some of us have life, vests on, and others are just swimming against, against the current with all that we have in us, and nothing else to buoy us. So, and like in thinking about just, again, this moment and how we know this, we're talking about this, we're talking about caregivers, we're talking about, Black and brown people are being decimated by this thing. But I think at some level, as a country, we're comfortable with these people being sacrificed. This is an extreme version of an ongoing narrative. This is not new. This is just, the pandemic just raises it all. And we have normalized the abnormal, like how does it make sense that a home health aide that cares for your elderly, father or your elderly mother does not have health insurance herself? It doesn't. It's immoral, but yet it's been the reality for however long, right? And again, it's because you don't see this woman as fully human as you, or as deserving of everything that you deserve, and it's actually one of my beefs with this current moment. And it's like one of the things that's kind of like driving me crazy is that we are talking about essential workers, but we're still not seeing essential workers, as like layered, complex human beings that are just like everybody else. And my fear is that if we do not retrain, and have different representations and different depictions, folks will continue to be erased even as they are talked about and they are at the center of every conversation. And that erasure, there's this great piece that I'm like looking it up. It's this great piece that Carolina Miranda wrote in the LA Times a while ago in response to the El Paso,
Yes.
shootings and attacks, around how when you have a vacuum of representation, it creates the space for other people to insert all of their negative things, which then makes any and all types of violence against you and your community reasonable and justified.
Absolutely.
And possible.
Absolutely.
Which
yeah,
is,
that was such a powerful
and
article.
there's that egregious violence, right, of like a massacre, right, or a kind of mass shooting. But then what about like the everyday violence, the ways that we're like being killed, like silently and quietly on an everyday basis? And I feel like that's what's happening right now with essential workers. We're talking about them, but we still don't really see them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That piece was so powerful. It's like when you're in visibilized, when you don't see the real nuanced stories of your fellow neighbor. There is, like she said, there's that vacuum where anyone can insert anything. And unfortunately, this administration has been pushing this propaganda to a point where, now 95,000 people have passed away, where so much of this could have been avoided. And I don't, and like you said, I do feel like it's going to magnify all of the social ills that that have been there. They're just, it's going to be a compounded experience for our communities. So yeah, We'll share that article. It's so powerful, and it's one that I reference often because it just gives you that context of why and how this the lack of media representation is deadly. It's not just hurtful or
yeah.
So I want to, we only have a couple more minutes left, but if there's anything else that you want to share. Oh, I do want to know when can we see the doc? When will it be released? And do you have any plans right now? I know that everything's very precarious because everything has completely been upended. But can you tell us how, or if you have some plans right now for a release?
Yes, so we will be doing some film festivals that have now moved online, and we'll be offering screenings, open to the public. So the best way to get informed is to follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter on our website, which is just throughthenightfilm.com. And thank you so much for this graphic with all of our handles. That's really great. So that's one way to see the film, and we will also start doing partner screenings with different community partner organizations and social justice organizations across the country. And so if you're interested in one of those, we are receiving requests right now. We haven't figured out the whole infrastructure for that yet, but we're planning to do that, and that's also something that you can request on our website. And then, just as this whole situation evolves, we will probably be, evolving as well in terms of our responses and figuring out ways to support the folks that are in the film and that, are in our broader community as well.
Yes. Well, thank you for all that you're doing. And one day I hope that we get to see each other again and perhaps play again. And
yes.
yeah. And if any of you, please follow Loira on socials as well, because you'll not only get some documentary work, but then you'll also get some mixes and some music. And I just feel that, our creative community, has really stuck together, like you said, before we even started. And I'm just so proud of the work you're doing and have been doing, not just with this documentary, but outside of it. You're really pushing what the norms are, and I think that's important work right now, always, but even more so right now. So thank you, Loira, for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. For those that are with us, Moni and I have long history in the New York City DJ community, and Moni and the crew that she was a part of, or is still a part of, because that's a lifelong membership, were one of very few sort of spaces where you saw women of color and queer women of color, DJing and holding cultural space for us in New York City. Now it's really common. There's a lot of really dope women DJs, but back then it wasn't so common. So, you were a real trailblazer, in the scene. And I had the pleasure of being able to come into a space and already see people that looked like me, which was really fundamental for me, So you, Robin, and Sally, y'all were critical for a lot of us. So it's just really nice to be able to be here. It feels like a full circle moment to be having this conversation with you. And I wanted to say one last thing, if I may.
Yes.
I didn't answer your question about how I'm taking care of myself. And I didn't, because I don't have a great, short, concise answer for that. It's messy for me. My relationship to self-care is, I'm in it. I'm grappling with it and trying to figure it out. But it's I'm on that journey of trying to understand what that means and looks like for me.
Same. Same. And
Yeah.
I think that's all we can do. It's, we, and I know that you're just as passionate as I am about so many things. And sometimes that passion, takes over. And next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, wait,
Yeah.
I need to get some rest. And
also, my idea of my self-worth is very tied to labor and being able to be of service to others. I am the child of immigrants and I did grow up poor. And so there's a lot that's like baked inside of me and I'm a Capricorn too, which, predisposes me to being a workaholic. So, and then I'm a New Yorker, right? Which we're always
hustling
in New York. So it's a real struggle for me. I feel like taking care of myself is almost like going against everything in my fiber, to do. I'm wired to do the opposite.
Oh, yes. I mean, I literally, I beg. I was like, lately, I've just like, I just need 30 minutes. Don't bug me. Don't bother me. Just 30 minutes. That's all I need. And I've been, and some days I just don't get to it. I don't get to the 30 minutes, and, but that's like my minimum right now. And sometimes I get it. And some other days I just don't. And sometimes a week goes by and I don't have that 30 minutes. But I hear you. It is multi-layered. It is cultural, and we're Caribbean. Come on, Caribbean culture is like, we're always taking care of everyone. We're always we'll say yes at the drop of a hat. We'll, we want to please. We want to work hard. It is it's so cultural. And even this moment, when you go in, I go on my timeline and people are like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm like, I've never been busier.
Me too. Oh yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, right? Like I have calls and things and people are talking about they're sharing recipes and sharing shows that they're binge watching. And I'm like, or they're talking about how bored they are. And I don't mean to be dismissive. Everyone is dealing with and impacted by this, and that's valid and that's real. But I think in those conversations, sometimes people forget, if you got a kid at home or multiple kids, this is hectic, and even then it's still obviously like a privilege and a luxury to be able to, be at home. But all of that said, it's really hectic. I feel like any chance that I had at work-life balance is kind of shattered, it's super hard to get a routine going for them, for me,
Yeah.
So it's like you're baking and or you watched how many you read a book. Must be really nice. I hope to be able to do that again one day.
Yes.
And I am happy for you that you're able to read a book, but I pass out with my clothes on most days.
All the time. Yeah. Exactly. Well, thank you for, your honesty. Thank you for your work, and your passion and your dedication to really uplifting our communities, and not just on the front lines, but behind the scenes and culturally. And I'm so looking forward to seeing the full film and going on this journey with you. So Loira, thank you again. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who tuned in. Once again, I want to remind you that the work that we do at Breakthrough is funded through donations from viewers like you. And every donation really helps us do work that builds a world that is more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for all of us. So Moni Vargas, once again, please stay well, be healthy, and we'll tune in next week. And please take a look at our schedule for next week. Loira, un abrazo bien grande. Nos vemos.
Igualmente, cuídate.
Gracias, igual.
Chao. Gracias a ti.
De nada, a ti, gracias.